Good afternoon and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week, I invite an expert from the world of business to share their knowledge, insights and tips to help you with your business challenges. If there's a topic you'd like covered or you feel you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie and perhaps we'll be having a chat here one day soon. My guest today runs Finance OTC Consulting, a Cork-based consultancy helping B2B businesses protect cash flow generation. There's something very important. She's a member of both Cork Chamber and the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce, and she's a thought leader who loves to keep abreast of the latest trends in operational finance. I'm delighted to welcome Evelyne Legaux to the You and Your Business studio. Hi, Evelyne.
Hi, Alec.
Hi.
How are you? Thank you for having me on the show today.
I'm delighted to have you, Evelyne, and you're not a person of few words, so you have a lot to cover and you have a fascinating story. I take everybody back to their last year in school. You know, were you the academic? Were you the person who was going into the workforce? What was on your mind?
When I went to university?
No, you started, you were in school and you were thinking to yourself, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
I think you took a wrong course initially, but then corrected it.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, when I was doing my leaving cert, I had no idea what I wanted to do next, right? That was a big challenge for me.
Sure.
So I actually eliminated a number of possibilities or professions that I wouldn't have liked. And then I got influenced by my boyfriend at the time, and I went into a dietitian kind of study, which I gave up very quickly because I realized wasn't for me. And then I waited until the next summer to join a university in Paris to study international economics and trade. And that was the right choice for me. General studies, you know, opening my mind and my thinking process.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Suddenly I'll look at being a dietitian, obviously influenced by somebody, and then you discover international economics, which you do, you know, it's just a straight swap. Okay, so it's a 5-year course you happen to do there. You come out with a master's. What were you going to do with that degree? What was on your mind and how was it going to influence your life going forward?
So the thing is, you know, with that kind of master's degree in France at the time, you could either continue with a doctorate and become a teacher, right? Or possibly in a university as well. Or you could try and pass some exams to join high-level administration in France, or join the corporate world. So I chose the last option and I joined a French company in Paris as a treasury analyst initially.
Right, that must have been exciting.
Yeah, it was quite interesting, you know, when you get your first full-time paid job, you know, after your studies, it's always very exciting times. And I was an international treasury analyst, actually, so working on currency hedges and working on international contracts to try and, you know, secure the business with guarantee bonds and things like that. So it was quite interesting for me, you know, coming from university. Yeah.
All right. So, okay, you're working in that role. But again, I suppose, in the corporate world, there's always opportunities to come along and people want to move you to different roles. So where did you move to next and what were the challenges presented to you?
So they, you know, they proposed to me to move on the domestic treasury side of things. So there I was more exposed to day-to-day cash management, and also to meeting with the banks and negotiating, you know, the terms and conditions with the various banks. So that gave me a broader picture of what the treasury function is about.
Sure.
And then later on, after this initial experience, I joined the multinational corporate world.
All right. Okay. And that's going to broaden your horizon even more. And what sort of function had you got there?
So at the time, treasury functions were also encompassing the management of accounts receivables and credit risk and cash collections. So that was my portfolio initially with the first multinational company I worked with, still in Paris. And we actually decided to build a mini shared services center for all the French entities. So that was I was doing for those entities, managing their treasury, their AR, and their credit function.
Okay, and then what was your next step in the corporate world?
So the next step in the corporate world is that, so first we made an acquisition. So we had to integrate more sister companies into the mini center. And then they also offered me an opportunity to move to Clermont-Ferrand in the center of France to manage customer services, which was a very interesting opportunity because it got me to work much more closely with the operation side of the business. So namely the manufacturing entities and the distribution and logistics entities as well.
So that must have given you a great insight to a more broader range of knowledge about the company.
Absolutely, because under my direct responsibility was order management and customer services. And they also decided to decentralize the credit and collections piece that was originally in Paris. And they wanted to bring it more closer to the business. So I moved that from Paris to Clermont-Ferrand. So at the end of the day, I had the whole order to cash cycle, under my responsibility, which was very insightful indeed, very valuable experience.
You might explain to our listeners just what order to cash is, because a lot of them wouldn't be familiar with the phrase, but would actually understand it in practice.
Sure. So order to cash is indeed somehow a new terminology that started to appear in the multinational corporate world, or let's say other large organizations, about 15 years ago. So the idea of order to cash is simply another way of describing the revenue cycle in a business. So it starts from the point of onboarding a new customer, right? Where the salespeople will give their input, the operations people their input, and the finance people their input to assess credit risk and determine the credit terms that the customer will be trading under.
Sure.
And then that cycle goes all the way to the point of collecting cash and receiving that cash from the customer, with everything in between. And in between, you have various process segments that are owned by different functions. And typically, you have order management.
Sure.
You have, if you ship products, for instance, you sell products, then you have the picking the products, shipping the products, billing the client, and then doing the cash collections piece, and then eventually booking the cash. So this is the whole order to cash cycle. On the payable side, you have a similar cycle called procure to pay or purchase to pay.
Which is the kind of the reverse of that.
Which is the reverse. Yeah, okay, exactly.
That's fantastic. So realistically, a lot of people are doing this on an SME type business, but without having it properly mapped out as a process. And we'll talk about that just a bit later. And if you're joining us now, you're listening to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Evelyne Legaux. Evelyne, let's just talk about your business life was about to take a turn because the company you were working for had ambitions to set up in Ireland. So this presented a new opportunity for you.
Yes, absolutely. So back in the summer 2000, the company announced a significant project to build a new European shared services center in Cork for the finance function.
Right.
So at that time, I applied for the European Accounts Receivable Manager position, which I secured for 3 years. So I went to Cork back in November 2000 to build that new shared services center from scratch.
Right.
with just a handful of people in the building, right? And it's still in operation today. It's a big center.
Right. That must have presented certain challenges, not least, of course, coming to Cork. But you fell in love with Cork very quickly.
I did fall in love with Cork very quickly, indeed, because, well, first of all, the role I had was very interesting, very challenging, as you said, and also because my social life in Cork started very quickly on a very positive note, right? I actually joined a salsa class, salsa dancing, because one
Yeah.
thing you don't know, Alec, is that
No, I don't.
I enjoy dancing. I've been dancing all my life.
Right.
And I found a salsa class and I built a network of friends from there. And then my network grew over the years. But yeah, I was really happy with my social life in Cork as well.
And that's very, very important, because I'm sure other opportunities were coming up all the time. But certainly the roles sort of developed as you were in Cork, and then there was requirements for you to travel quite a bit. So let's talk about that for a minute and what that was like.
Yeah, so the idea with this role was to migrate a number of finance functions that were determined to be in scope from all the many different countries and across the 3 or 4 divisions, to migrate all of that to Cork, right? So obviously, you can't do that overnight. You have to manage that using a very thorough project management methodology, because you need to design the new processes, the new policies, right? And then you need to agree with the various countries where the process perform locally is going to stop, and where and what the center in Cork is going to take over. So you have to work with the countries very closely. You have to travel, and the biggest challenge is to actually gain the trust from the people in the various countries, right? Because they are always very nervous, very anxious as to what's
And they
going to
don't
happen.
like change. And they
They
don't
don't
like
like change. They don't like when change is being imposed on them. So you need to bring them along with you on the journey. And also for some of those people, it clearly meant that they would be losing their job locally, right? So yes, definitely challenges, I would say, mostly on the human side of things. Yes.
All right. So what was next on the horizon?
So after that, the company made an acquisition in Europe. So we had to also integrate the acquisition into the processes and policies and systems that we had built for the new shared services center. And it was also the time when Sarbanes-Oxley SOX compliance requirements became mandatory for international companies headquartered in the US. So we project managed that as well to design all the SOX controls, narratives, and the mitigation controls themselves, right? So that was another challenge in the role.
All right. There was another challenge going to come, because you were going to move jobs, you were going to move companies, but also it was going to require you to move cities, which presented a big challenge to you. However, you did, and just tell our listeners just a bit about that you managed to move to Dublin, of all places, and take up a new role.
Yes, so at the end of my expatriation assignment with the first multinational company, then an opportunity came up for me to move to Dublin to join another much bigger, much larger multinational company as EMEA, or European, Middle East, Africa, credit and collections manager for one of their business streams. So that was the perfect job for me at the time. That was exactly what I was dreaming of doing.
Right.
Because that was the opportunity for me to really specialize in this credit and collections, now called order to cash finance function.
Right. And we don't mind, you don't mind talking about the company, which is a global company. And it was at a time when they had probably one of their best products ever been launched.
Yes, so I think your listeners will identify the company when I tell them that at the time the company was launching their Xbox 360 product, which was which was a huge adventure. And I will always remember the launch party we had in the city center in Dublin, with a lot of gamers coming from all over the place, you know, to play with it. And it was just incredible. So
fantastic. No,
yeah.
fantastic. And if you're just joining us now, you're listening to You and Your Business with me, Alec, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Evelyne Legaux. Evelyne, okay, you're with Microsoft, you're in Dublin, the property market is expensive, but your new home in Cork is calling. So you want to head back. So tell our listeners a bit about how you planned your journey back there.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, when I worked with Microsoft, the experience itself was amazing, because Microsoft was, and I presume it still is today, very much ahead of the game in terms of systems, in terms of business processes, and so forth. And in Microsoft, there is something happening every day, something new. There's a new project, people bring you into their project, and so forth. So very, very valuable experience where I learned a lot, right? But on the, you know, parallel to that, in my personal life, I had two challenges. One was I wanted to buy property, and at the time the prices were very, very high with no quality to go with it. And also my social life wasn't as exciting as the one I had in Cork before. So I decided to stay with Microsoft for a good couple of years, and then to try and move back to Cork.
All right.
So yeah, that's how it happened. And it actually happened 6 months later. I made the decision. Yeah.
Well, you made the decision, and then you made your way back. And you did actually move to what might be perceived as a bit of a competitor down there. Did that cause much trouble?
So that's right. So actually, a great opportunity came up with a direct competitor of the hardware business of Microsoft, and that company was Logitech, right? But the role in itself, the role was similar, EMEA Credit and Collections Manager. The context was very rewarding for me, because the situation I found at Logitech was broken processes, an unprofessional team, and a system that had not been implemented properly. So basically everything had to be rebuilt and fixed. And one of my challenges was to bring that team to a professional level, so that they would gain the trust from the whole business organization in the European region and further afield. So, and coming from Microsoft, where I was holding a very similar role, I knew I could bring so much to them in terms of processes, systems, and people, right? So that was very exciting times as well for me.
All right, so you're going to spend how long there? Because again, there's more of a calling to do other things.
Yeah, so actually with Logitech, I stayed much longer. I stayed eight and a half years, I think, because my role evolved over the years. So first, the Asia Pacific region was added to my portfolio. And then later on, the whole controllership services organization changed, and all the senior manager positions were made truly global.
Right.
So at that point, I became the senior credit risk manager for the whole world.
Wow.
And I handed over my collections responsibilities to another manager who was managing that function for the whole world as well. And we were obviously working very closely because of all the daily touch points that you have always between cash collections and credit risk management.
I mean, you were to change jobs again and get involved in quite complex transactions where there was sort of buying and selling of businesses,
Yeah.
which required a lot of skills. And I'm not kind of potentially skipping over these because we could spend an afternoon just talking about those alone.
Sure.
But I suppose the net result was you were going to get to a situation of deciding, hey, I think I'd like to take a break from all of this and start maybe getting out on my own and just setting up my own type of business.
Yeah, absolutely. So after Logitech, I joined another multinational company in a different industry, in the specialty chemicals industry. And as you said, there were a lot of things happening there, building a shared services center, integrating a business acquisition, spinning off another business, and so on, and then embarking on a complex program to completely redesign the business processes of the companies worldwide to make them simpler and harmonized and so forth. So that took me until summer 2019, when I decided to take a break for a few months, and then for myself, right? And then when I came back on the market, I realized that, you know, I had accumulated a lot of expertise over the past 30 years in this order to cash, or let's say credit management function,
Sure.
you know, on a global level, and that I actually wanted to approach work differently, you know,
Right.
to have more freedom in what I do, who I work with, and so forth, more variety in what I do, and also to be able to help more companies rather than dedicating myself to the one large company.
Yeah, I mean, you'd worked for large organizations. There was a lot of travel involved. You'd found a very nice place to live in Cork with a good social life. So you don't
Yeah.
need to be killing yourself to sustain that. So let's just talk about, you've set up your own business. Of course, your timing wasn't the best at the beginning of COVID, but if you can survive COVID, you'll survive everything. So tell me, what are you doing today that our listeners would be interested in, and how do you think you can help them?
Okay. So basically with Finance OTC Consulting, I help B2B businesses protect cash flow generation from their sales activities, right? So I would typically provide advisory services on their credit management policy, or help them develop and implement a credit management policy if they don't have one. And I would also look at their processes, you know, how do they manage credit risk? How
Sure.
do they know the risk profile of their customers? How do they assess that? How do they grant, you know, credit terms or payment terms to their customers? How do they mitigate the risk, right? And are they aware of the risk that they are running? And
Sure.
then how do they go about collecting the cash owed by customers? How do they make sure that those customers pay on time, right? Because this is very critical, especially in today's uncertain times, and you know, whenever we go through crisis, cash becomes king all the time,
Yes.
right? There are so many small businesses that eventually fall because some customers become insolvent, let them down, and they can't survive. They become insolvent, right? So that's a couple of things that I do, and I can also advise on risk mitigation tools and strategies, credit insurance program, trade finance solutions, meaningful KPIs, you know, to monitor how they are doing with that finance function and so forth.
Sure.
And it's very critical for companies that start scaling or
Right.
growing very fast, or even starting to sell internationally. They need to have robust processes in place to manage their order to cash function, and a solid credit management policy as well.
Yeah, I think what people fail to understand is that in this excitement to expand rapidly, that you must put in place robust processes and understand that if you're exporting, that rules and regulations and export insurance and all of the important parts are in place.
Yes, absolutely. So what I see happening is that SMEs are, or the business owners, or even the people in charge of finance, they're always very busy with all the business, the selling, the operations, the marketing and so forth, that they tend to overlook this side of their business.
Sure.
Unfortunately, nasty stories happen.
Yes.
And, the typical story is they have a good historical customer that they have been trading with since the beginning, that appears to be very reliable and very faithful to them and so forth. And then all of a sudden, guess what? That customer is no longer able to pay their bills, right? Okay.
Yes.
And they didn't see it coming. And they didn't see it coming. Why? Because they don't have this order to cash process and credit management policy to manage the risk, right? So oftentimes some SMEs understand the need for it too late, right?
Yes.
So my mission is to tell them to anticipate that and not allow that to happen and to threaten their own business survival.
That's well, I must say that's a great piece of advice on which to finish the show. Will you just tell our listeners where they can find out more about you, Evelyne?
So yeah, so they can reach to me on email at info@financeotcconsulting.com, or on my website, financeotcconsulting.com as well. I always offer a free discovery call, to any new prospects. So don't be afraid to reach out to me. There's no commitment, and I'm always happy to chat and see how I can help.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Well, a special thanks to our guest today, Evelyne Legaux, for coming into the You and Your Business studio. Thanks also to Sam and Sound. The podcast of today's show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. And please remember to join me, Alec Drew, again next week at the same time, 1 o'clock, right here on 103.2 Dublin City FM for another edition of You and Your Business.